Good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Regina Yao, the founder and president of the Pixel Project, and I'm moderating the first YouTube live stream session of the 11th fall edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. And today's YouTube session also marks our 22nd Read for Pixels live stream author panel. The Pixel Project created these multi-author panel sessions to be an accessible resource for writers interested in writing about female characters and approaching themes such as misogyny, sexism, gender, and violence against women with depth, empathy, and accuracy. And what better topic for us to discuss than Father Does Not Know Best, Fatherhood, Masculinity, and Violence Against Women in Horror. And here to take part in the discussion are three award-winning best-selling horror authors who are also parents themselves. So the first right there at the bottom right-hand corner is Angela Yuriko Smith. Angela is the Horror Writers of America president and the Space and Time publisher. And she is a two-time Bram Stoker Award winner. And as a publishing coach, she helps writers submit more than her weekly calendar of she helps writers submit more with her weekly calendar of author opportunities at authortunities.substack.com. And Errick Nunnally, who is right above Angela, was raised in Boston and served in the USMC. He graduated from art school and studied Krav Maga. He has published 3 novels, Blood for the Sun, All the Dead Men, and Lightning Wears the Cape, and several stories in anthologies and magazines. And right below me is John Langan, and John is the author of 2 novels and 6 collections of stories. And for his work, he has received the Bram Stoker and This Is Horror Awards. And he is one of the founders of the Shirley Jackson Awards and continues to serve on its board of advisors. He lives in New York's Mid-Hudson Valley with his wife and younger son. And aside from joining today's panel, Angela, Errick, and John have donated some super exclusive goodies to the stash of author treats we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels Fall 2025 Rally Up fundraising page. And Angela's giving away 3 types of goodies that will appeal to writers worldwide. The first is the Authortunities newsletter subscription for authors. And this is the weekly calendar mail out where you can get subscribers can get a full month of open subscription calls, grants, etc. sent straight to their email inbox. And the second goodie from Angela is the Authortunities Hub subscription for authors. And this is basically a chance for you to get a bunch of opportunities that authors need. For example, as the Authortunities Co-op member, you are eligible to publish under Authortunities Press, the collaborative imprint. You'll receive an ISBN and barcode every month. This is optional but included, and you have access to tools and training to prepare your book for print. And 100% of the royalties and rights retained and promotional support, including YouTube features and social media spotlights reaching over 25,500 plus readers, writers, and creatives. And the third goodie from Angela is her critique bundle. And Angela will read 10 pages from a donor's work in progress, followed by a 60-minute consultation session during which she will provide feedback and advice about writing and publishing. And Angela will also provide you with a recording of that session. And Errick has some really cool treats. It's 3 different graphic novels from his library. So he's curated these. The first one is Heart Transplant by Andrew Bax, I think, and Frank Caruso. It's the first edition. And let me just say that this graphic novel is about bullying in schools. And this is a very timely topic because bullying also affects girls in school and it affects them differently from boys. And it also brings in shades of gender-based violence. So this is something that you might want to read about in this graphic novel. And there's also Barnstormers by Scott Snyder and Tula Lotte. This is also a first edition. And the last broadcast by, can't really pronounce their last names. I think it's Andre Cirangelo and Gabriel Lumazark, I think.
Maybe.
Yeah. It's the first edition as well, and it collects all 7 issues. And what Errick's going to do is he's going to write a short letter explaining why he recommends these graphic novels. And he'll sign that letter and he'll send it straight to you. These are for donors in the US only. And finally, John is offering a 60-minute Zoom call for writers looking for expert guidance. So the donor has a choice of either making this Zoom session a consultation on a piece of fiction of up to 10 pages long, and this is available to single writers or writing duos. Or the second option is just having a general conversation with John about writing and publishing, and this is available for individuals or groups. And now, before we go straight to our discussion, you and the audience will be able to ask John, Errick, and Angela questions live. Just make sure that you're logged into your YouTube account so that you can type your questions into the chat box to the right of the YouTube screen. And Jay, who's today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay them to me to put on screen and read out to our panel to answer. And for now, let's get into it. So here's a quick introduction to today's topic. So ever since Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, horror authors have created and peopled their stories with a wide range of fictional fathers and father figures that are pivotal to the tales of terror that they weave. From the twisted and violent versions of fatherhood embodied by Jack Torrance in The Shining to the fathers and father figures who are desperate to save their families and loved ones from monsters, for example, the two dads in Paul Tremblay's The Cabin at the End of the World. We are going to be looking at a whole range of dads and how they can inform the conversation about sexism, misogyny, toxic masculinity, and violence against women. And here's the thing: some of these fictional horror dads are so iconic that they have made their way into mainstream pop culture consciousness. Everybody knows that iconic picture of the dad in The Shining from the Stanley Kubrick movie. That's just one example. And so today's panel will be talking about the history and the portrayal of fatherhood in the horror genre and how father figures in horror can catalyze conversations about masculinity, misogyny, sexism, and violence against women. And we'll also touch on tips and suggestions for writing better fictional fathers. So with all this in mind, let's get the discussion rolling. Welcome, Angela, Errick, and John. Thank you for joining us this evening. So in introduction to this panel, we mentioned a few of the best-known fathers across horror movies and books who also represent both ends of the fatherhood spectrum, from dads who are good but imperfect male role models to the fathers who are the embodiment of toxic masculinity and violence. So who are your favorite fictional fathers in horror and why? So let's start with Angela.
If I'm going on the horrible end of it, I would say, I don't know if you guys have ever seen House of a Thousand Corpses, but that is the scariest movie ever. I've never been able to finish it. And Big Daddy Firefly actually still gives me nightmares. Probably the only thing like that I couldn't stand. And then, of course, you've mentioned Jack, but I think my favorite bad father in all of those would be the Amityville Horror father, George. And that was also that was a key movie for me growing up. But if we're talking about good fathers, I have to say Gomez. I mean, he still counts as Gomez Adams. He still counts as a horror figure, right? He'd be my favorite. I want Gomez to be my father. How about, are we going by order of name? So that'd be Errick, I guess.
I'd be next. Yeah, I think the first time I kind of glommed onto the idea of a father in a book was actually in Chuck Wendig's Blue Blazes. Is a duology, and Mookie Pearl is this sort of Terminator type underworld character who loves charcuterie, of all things, and he's estranged from his daughter, but it throughout the two books you start to understand how he's recognizes his own flaws and what he has failed at with his daughter, but he has never really given up on her and the opportunity to help her, whatever the consequences, he chooses her, which I just really like that, despite the fact that he's a terrible dad. And the other one was Bug, the main character in Blacktop Wasteland. Bug's a reformed criminal, shall we say? But once you've got you dip your toe in that water, it's kind of hard to dry off, shall we say? And he ends up getting dragged back in. But he's got a wife and 2 kids, and he recognizes, again, this is someone who's a father who's got enough self-awareness to realize what their flaws are, and they actively try to operate against them. And they both get hard reminders of what it means, of what their bad decisions early on meant. So more well-rounded characters in really high octane, fantastic stories.
Okay, John?
I think the fathers that I find stick with me most are sort of situated maybe halfway between the good and the bad. So, we've mentioned The Shining already. And of course, when we think about The Shining, we tend to think about Jack Nicholson in Kubrick's film, right? Which is to say, a father who is basically just crazy from the get-go. And we're just waiting in that movie for him to crack. But in King's novel, he's a much more nuanced character and a much more complex character who struggles with the legacy of his own father's abuse and his own alcoholism, and who is fighting in a lot of ways throughout the novel until the bitter end against this thing that ultimately overtakes him. And it does overtake him, spoiler alert. But at the same time, that is, in the context of King's novel, a kind of a tragedy, as opposed to in Kubrick's film, where we just think to ourselves, I know what's going to happen, and how bad is it going to get? I think as well, King in Pet Sematary, the protagonist of that is a doctor named Lewis Creed, who has 2 young children, who's taken a job at the University of Maine, and he moves with these children next to a very dangerous road, and he winds up doing things that the family cat is run over, and his neighbor tells him, "Here's the pet cemetery. Here's a way to return this to this cat to your family," and he's just trying to do right by his family. And it doesn't go so well, and it just keeps going more and more, or less and less well, I suppose. But he is driven throughout by feelings of paternal responsibility, I suppose, and also feelings of paternal failure, feelings that he has failed his family in a very crucial moment, and he makes a terrible choice to try to undo that failure, but it doesn't work out so well.
Okay, so all 3 of you have talked about, the examples are given in just like a wide spectrum of dads and father figures in horror. And this may sound counterintuitive to a lot of people, but which fictional fathers in horror would you say are role models for positive masculinity? Angela?
Well, I'm going to go back with Gomez Adams again. He is so in touch with his emotions and being a strong character. And I'm going to die on that because he actually is a horror character. He's just a really nice one. So that's who I think. He's supportive, he's loving. And I also think one of the reasons why we do love him so much, and I obviously am a fan, is because he allows that eccentricity to come out, which I think is important. It's an important message for males, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. But I think a lot of times in the past we haven't allowed men to be who they really are. There's like these, and women too. There's like little stereotypes that we all have to fit in, like guys don't cry and women keep the home nice. Those like kind of stereotypes. But Gomez is one of the, in horror, I think is really good for this. We can break out of that. more easily, I think. And Gomez kind of celebrates that. And I think that's why he is an enduring character and a great father figure.
Yeah, I just finished watching Wednesday yesterday, and he is indeed a great father figure, regardless of who plays him. The character is so well written that he just defies all the stereotypes. It's amazing.
He does.
Yeah.
I fantasized as a kid that he was my father. I'll just say that.
So, Errick, what do you think? Are there any role models in the
I have a tortured relationship with the idea of a fictional role model. I do think that there's can be inspiring for positive behavior or to prompt thought, but because they're not real and they don't evolve and change, and you can't interact with them. So, I don't know. Like I just really the only one that came to mind, the only ones that came to mind were a gay couple, and I've actually spent the last few years trying to find the title of this story and where it appeared. But it was a short story, and it's about a gay couple who have a young daughter, and that daughter is being stalked and tortured by something they can't see or hear or any of that. And one of the fathers is very skeptical, and the other one is willing to entertain this stuff. But they both really come around to defending this child, and that's kind of it. Like having a father whose loyalty is to his children, to me, is about the best role model you can find, because from that loyalty, from that place is where priorities are built, and trust and things like that. So that's my half-assed terrible answer.
John, do you have any examples you want to share?
I do. I think that I was thinking about Ray Bradbury's novel "Something Wicked This Way Comes," in which there were two boys, one of whom represents I don't know, the kind of like the daytime, and the other of whom represents the nighttime, if you will, and the daytime boy, whose name is Will, his father is a little bit older. Bradbury, I don't think Bradbury ever tells us exactly how old he is, but it's clear that he had Will, maybe in his 40s, something like that. But by today's standards, not very old. But by the standards of, I think it was the 1960s when the book was written, definitely a later in life, fatherhood. And now his son is a teenager, and he is very worried that he is too old to be the father of a teenage boy. And especially in the context of the novel, there are these supernatural threats, this supernatural carnival that is menacing the boys, and he steps up to help them, but he is a particularly vulnerable kind of a figure. There's a wonderful moment early in the novel where he sees that his son has built a sort of improvised ladder along the side of the house to allow him to sneak out of his window should he need to. And rather than, yelling at him or having him take it down, he just says, well, just promise me that you'll only use it if you really need to. And the kind of trust that's embodied in that is quite wonderful. And I have to say, on a slightly different note, that Angela talking about the Addams Family made me think about the Munsters. And Herman Munster, who's a big goof, and I wouldn't exactly claim him as father of the year, but at the same time, when I was a kid, I found him so compelling because I was terrified of the actual Frankenstein's monster, and this big hulking monstrous individual who is actually very kind and very kind of goofy, and is always trying to help his son. Even if he doesn't really know what he's doing. I find that very endearing. I don't know if it's exactly it's a better role model than some. So I would be happy to give give Herman Munster a shout out.
Yeah,
Gomez was a great answer.
there's this scene, right, in the Munsters where they were at the dinner table, and I saw this clip and it struck me. I just remembered it, where they were talking about, is it more important to be popular at school, or is it more important to be kind to people? And Herman Munster taught his son that it's more important. Popularity is fleeting, and it's more important to be kind to people. And it kind of just stuck with me. That teaching your son that is so important, and a lot of parents don't do that. They don't take the time to sit down with their sons and talk about emotions and feelings like that. Kindness is an emotion and feeling as well, not just an action. So I thought that was, you bringing up the Munsters is a really interesting point, because they do have these little scenes. And I'm young. I've seen it on and off on my side of the world when I was growing up, just on Sunday afternoons. And I always thought that it's really interesting that they made horror figures not scary, and that they talk about all these important things. So anyway, speaking of that, okay, so the role of fathers and fatherhood in the real world has been undergoing significant changes over the past 50 years or so, thanks in part to feminism's push for gender equality in all spheres of life, including including advocating for fathers who are more proactive and involved parents who treat their children of all genders with equal love and respect. Do y'all think that this is reflected in the way fictional fathers and fatherhood are portrayed in the horror fiction of the 21st century? Let's start with Angela.
I really do. And I think that I'm really going to bring up my fellow authors here in this panel. We were talking about Paul Tremblay earlier, and I'm going to say that right here we have great examples of people who are writing, of authors that are writing these great father figures that are a little bit not the stereotypical, that are thinking for themselves. We've got like Paul Tremblay in The Cabin at the End of the World. We have two father figures, which is a little bit untraditional for what was going on in the past. And then the whole point of it is the love, that it's not the loss of power or anything like that that is the threat, which I would say is like in The Shining, it's that toxic masculinity is threatened, and that kind of winds up causing a crisis. But in The Cabin, you have it's more like the love or the relationships are threatened, the state of being a father. And I'm going to say the same for Errick and John, like in was The Fisherman, I think, and I might have this wrong, John, so you can correct me all you want. But the loss is that he wanted to be a father. He was almost a father, and it kind of colors a lot of it. And yeah, I think that you guys are great. The authors that are working right now are overthrowing those stereotypes and making the difference. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. Errick?
Yes. I think it has definitely evolved and become more inclusive. Like Angela's example is perfect. I've been pleased to see the amount of different types of families, or different type of family units, anything from chosen to adopted to biological to incidental, like where grandparents get it, you need to raise a child. But yeah, I think that it's evolved quite a bit to actually have father and mother figures that are not stereotypical. They don't lean too hard on tropes. And I think the biggest difference is that when you're writing a character, you can actually you get more of the inner dialogue, and being able to understand their thoughts and emotions, and getting their background, like the reasons for things. I do think a lot of dads had missed that in a lot of the fiction when I was growing up, but it is a notable difference now, to have more well-rounded fathers and father figures.
John, any thoughts?
Yeah, I first thank you, Angela, for that very kind shout out. Um, I would concur with my esteemed colleagues that I think that fatherhood has been shown over the last half century, let's say, in fiction, film, TV, to be a more complex and less monolithic thing than maybe it had been presented as previously. And I think there were still what would you call it, like monstrous fathers, I guess. Nat Cassidy has a wonderful book out right now called When the Wolf Comes Home, which is all about a monster father, or the dad, the monstrous father, the father is monster. But I feel, even like in that case, that trope is being explored in new and interesting kinds of ways, and in what Nat is doing. And I think that it's also absolutely true that different family configurations are, everything is on the table right now. And so there are different fathers, different kinds of fathers, different ways to be a father, all of which are work their way into contemporary fiction, which yeah, I think makes actually for a much more dynamic and interesting kind of fictional setup.
So we talked a bit just now about how which fathers could be positive male role models in terms of masculinity, sexism, misogyny, violence against women. Do you and what I've noticed is, and not just with horror, but with anything in mainstream media and pop culture, is that anything negative tends to get a lot more traction than anything positive. So do you think there might come a time when a positive father figure in horror becomes just as much of a jumping off point or lightning rod for conversations about sexism, misogyny, toxic masculinity, and violence against women as the negative, violent, horrible fathers? Angela?
I'm going to say yes. But I think negative fathers are that lightning rod because they embody that fear of patriarchal violence, that kind of, like we were kind of talking a little bit before we started this, like as far back as we've had stories, that's been kind of one of the themes of them. So I'm going to say I hope. That's going to be my answer. Like, yes, hopeful. I'm very hopeful.
Okay. Errick?
Yes, kind of the same answer. Yes, but no. Like, I know it's possible for something like that to happen, but I think it's these characters that are, they're, especially in horror, like they're the evil ones. Like if you manage to draw a really good evil character, they are so memorable and so integral to driving the protagonist to whatever it is that they have to do, that I think it's always going to be more memorable to have the terrible dad than anything. There's just, yes, but no.
John, what do you think?
Well, I absolutely agree that it's evil people, or in a fictional context, evil people are always interesting. Maybe not more interesting, but I think that they're interesting. Villains are interesting. Hannibal Lecter, take your pick. And I think that it's possible. I don't know. It's possible for me to imagine if you have these portraits of fathers that are maybe too simple, just dad is so good and he's so understanding and he's so I can imagine writers getting fed up with that and readers getting fed up with that, but I also feel that's kind of in some ways already the case, that if you're writing a sort of a simple two-dimensional character, honestly, either bad or good, I think that ultimately readers will lose patience with that. There are times, I guess, when you want the sort of comfort food of a two-dimensional character, but I think that ultimately what people want are complex, compelling characters. I think that writing about good characters is actually it can be kind of difficult. It's more of a challenge to make good interesting, because so often good is, it's not Aragorn with the sword charging at Sauron. It's these little things that we do every day to try to help each other and to help make the world a better place, help make our families better. And that can be difficult to make dramatic. I kind of wonder, maybe that's one of the reasons, Regina, that you remember that scene from The Munsters, because what they do is they use the kind of startling visual of the monster who's like, be kind, you should really be kind, and that makes it memorable, right? Because there's that juxtaposition between Herman, the Frankenstein's monster, and this very sweet message.
Yeah. I think often that a good character, is kind of there to be tortured. Right? So you've got this good character, and you're putting them through their paces to see how they're going to change or how they're going to overcome something. And they might still be good at the end, but they'll be different. Like Chloe McLeod Chapman has a story, I think it's called Rest Stop, and it's a father who is perpetually at this rest stop trying to locate his missing kid. And it's an incredible example of show, don't tell. So the whole thing is the whole story is you're understanding the situation by the father's behavior with people coming to the rest stop and things that he's doing. And like, there's really no flashbacks, and there's no action other than the dad trying to solve this problem. So he's fundamentally a good person, but now he's questioning how good he was. Why wasn't I there? What can I do now? And it just escalates all the way through to the end. It's awful, but it's great.
So that sort of naturally segues us into the next section of this discussion, which is writing better father figures and characters. So let's get down to the nuts and bolts of how to write better and more powerful representations of fathers and fatherhood in horror. So what are the techniques? What are some of the techniques that horror authors can use to effectively subvert toxic stereotypes and tropes of fathers and fatherhood, and perhaps even use them to send a message to the reader that there are healthier and far less violent models of fatherhood and masculinity out there? Angela.
Well, I think one thing with horror is that we really do thrive on the archetypes, the stereotypes, the abuser, the absent father, the absent patriarch, I guess, the alpha protector. But we can twist those into more complex, interesting things. We can invert expectations. So we can start with the stereotype that everybody, you think that this is what's going to happen, but then we can add elements that completely change it. And so instead of it always being like earlier, I had talked about, a lot of times I feel like the inciting incident is the threat of power, like losing power, or insults, or, that humiliations, that kind of toxic masculinity thing. But we can also show like love being threatened or vulnerability in that case. Generational trauma. That's one thing I'm going to say I like about Errick's books is generational trauma is something that is threatened. That is the thing that kind of causes things to move. And so and also I'm going to say write better women characters to go with fathers, write better mothers. And I think that would be my 2 cents.
Okay.
I've given
Errick?
4 cents already. That's 2 and then 2. Now 4 cents.
Errick?
Hey, Angela, I think that is the first time that I actually wrote like a father figure, a father who was actually a positive influence and a fairly decent person. And
I loved him.
Thank you. I had to. I think what's often missing when it comes to a father is, especially if they are problematic, is their interactions with people who aren't their offspring or their spouse. And I think that's a good way to see what is this person like when they're not with their family. Like, when they're not being a father. And that, I think that can produce more insights, even if it's with a distant uncle, their own father, a best friend, an interaction at the store. Um, Maybe they don't have any female friends. Maybe they don't have any male friends. These are all the types of things that you can use to expose what actual type of person they are.
Yeah. And it's kind of true to life as well, because, I've been working in the anti-violence against women movement for going on 16 years now. And what you see in domestic violence cases is that a lot of men who are the pillars of society outside, pillars of the community, at home, they are, they're lauded, they're celebrated outside the home, but they go home and they batter their wives and kids. So there's the duality there. That's the Jekyll and Hyde thing that we talk about. And, and what Errick says is if writers can do that, show how fathers behave outside the home versus inside the home, it actually adds quite a bit of authenticity to it as well. And it would make the father figure character feel a lot more real, I think. So what do you think, John?
I think a couple of things, actually. I mean, I was thinking about when I had a very sort of problematic relationship with my own dad growing up, which was as much my responsibility as it was his. And I can remember he died when I was 23, and at his wake, one of his friends came up and said to me, "Oh, I wasn't aware that your father had been this great sort of advisor and sort of counselor to my son, and basically what a great guy your dad was." And I didn't know what to make of that. I didn't know what to do with that information, but in years and years later, like 30 odd years later, I can look at that and recognize, oh yeah, I mean, in a positive sense, like outside of the confines of our relationship and how I saw him, he could be, I guess he didn't have the burden of our relationship, and that maybe allowed him to be this kind of much more benevolent figure to this young man who needed advice and who took his advice, with great enthusiasm. So I think that those, like if you can, and I guess here we're thinking beyond the short story, right? We're thinking where we move into longer stories, novellas, novels. I think that the chance to show the reader and possibly the characters as well who this person is, outside of whatever their family is experiencing, can be really, can really help to give that character a kind of depth. So they may still be ultimately a villain, but they may be a villain that we at least sort of understand. There's a marvelous novel by Kaylee Peterson called Sacrificial Animals that's just out in paperback now, and it's very much about sort of generational trauma and a kind of monstrous father figure whose two sons are called back home. Well, one son is called back home, the other son is there anyway because he's dying, and all sorts of things come out and what have you. And she does a really interesting job at looking at those sorts of dynamics, but also I think trying to some degree to understand why the father is the way he is, which is it's not to excuse him, but it is maybe to explain him. And if you can explain him, maybe you can, sort of start to understand him.
Okay. So what are some of your tips and suggestions for horror authors who write in genres or subgenres such as horror and grimdark fantasy, where violence and violent masculinity is still very much a genre convention? How can they include more positive father figures and male role models in their stories? Angela.
We had so many good answers, but I got into what John was saying and I forgot. I'm going to say flip the script. Flip the script, especially because we do tend to do the stereotypes and the tropes and the archetypes, but it's you can flip that script and make like fatherhood is often the liability, and having children is often the liability in these type of things in our stories. So you can flip that and make it the thing that saves them, or have the characters overcome the thing that is the problem. Like if Jack had maybe beaten back, I kind of, and this may be just me, but I feel like right now we're trending towards more hopeful stories. We might want to see Jack win against everything that is coming at him. We might want to see our characters, even if they don't win, at least don't quite succumb, maybe win on their terms. So I would say, like, use some of the things that we typically think as weaknesses, like having children, it's really hard to be in a zombie apocalypse with kids, especially really young ones, but to have those be the strengths. And I think that would go far to changing that.
I think that's really interesting, because every time we read apocalyptic stories with children in them, there's always a horrible ending for the kids, or or the family. And what would be really interesting is we had the reverse of the road, or something like that.
Like what if baby poop was repellent for zombies? Something like that.
Yeah.
I hate the road. That's all. It's just depressing. It's an awful book.
Okay, so Errick, what are your tips? Do you have any hot tips for authors?
I love Angela's suggestion of figuring out where the expected is and subverting it. Like that sounds perfect. But I'm going to stick with making sure that character interacts with other people. They might have a relationship with an animal, or they may have a habit outside of the home, or what do they like at work versus home? How do they apply what they've learned from work at home? Like just things that are in the orbit of the character that are going to demonstrate what type of a person they are without tons of exposition or getting into their head too much. So yeah, I think show don't tell is definitely a kind of a cliche thing to say, but that's what it means. Like you can actually show this person being the type of character you want to demonstrate if you introduce other scenarios that aren't maybe what's expected for them to be in.
John, any thoughts?
Yeah, I was thinking about Chuck Wendig wrote a novel a couple of years ago called The Book of Accidents. And one of the main characters in that is a man who has been abused as a child and who should be, like he's the stereotype, right? Of oh, he's becoming the abuse. But he has fought against that. And he has very deliberately worked to make himself not that person, to overcome his own his own past, I guess. I almost want to say like his own programming, he's worked to become something different. It's not to say that he has no violence in him whatsoever, but it is to say that he's aware of it and he's working to control it. And so I think, one thing you might think about is the more self-aware character who understands, I had these bad experiences. Maybe they don't need to define me. And I also think that parenthood can often be used as a sort of a plot engine. Your children are in jeopardy. Your children have been murdered. Your children have been taken from you. What if it was actually like an asset? What if being a good parent, a good father, what if that was actually an asset to the character? So when the zombie apocalypse happens, dad is actually not like, well, we got to sacrifice the kids, but dad is like, it's like, little Billy, I never liked you, so I'm sorry if you're gonna go out there while the rest of us run away.
Only you'd run fast.
What if instead of that, being a father, it is helpful. And instead of being a liability. That's the thing, right? Is that I do understand, one of the ways that horror works is that it questions our basic assumptions of all sorts of things in the world. And so the idea that, you know, family love will be enough and that's the most important thing, yes, horror can and often does question and subvert that. But I almost feel that's become so expected and so much the cliche that maybe it would be more interesting to say, no, actually that's true, you know, like that kind of love may be enough in the zombie apocalypse. Not for little Billy, but I mean for everybody else it's okay.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned Chuck's character in the Book of Accidents and how maybe you should think about writing more self-aware father figures,
Yeah.
because you know, in real life, and I'm just going to connect this for a moment to what we see in, you know, while working to stop violence against women, is that a lot of programs where abusers get court ordered to attend, to try to reprogram them, deprogram them from all the, you know, misogyny, violence against women, male violence, and toxic masculinity. They don't really work for a lot of the men. But in all my almost 16 years of working in this field, I've only come across two men who did the work that Chuck Wendig's character underwent. Like, they will not let what happened define them, and they realize that they're self-aware enough to realize that they were wrong for being abusive, that their fathers were abusive, that this is generational, and it took them their entire lives of being really conscious of it, making sure that they don't behave like this anymore, making amends. And that's a really long road, a really long journey. And it would be really interesting to see more horror writers have characters like that show that it is maybe part of the horror is facing yourself as a man, as a dad, that you did all these horrible things before and you're trying to change. And you know, horror could always externalize it by having it, you know, a monster or whatever mixed into it. But I think it would be really interesting if we had more books like that. But that's just my perspective from where I'm, from the work that I do.
That might demonstrate to some people that it is possible to be different. I know that it's really hard to figure out what the trigger is for someone to change, right? Who has to say what to them at what moment that then they themselves realize that what they're doing and that they want to change. And my theory on that when it comes to dudes, because, you know, we're raised poorly, right? Right up through Gen X, raised pretty poorly. It's starting to be a little different these last few generations, a little different. But I feel like it takes just as long to undo some of that thinking as it did for you to be thinking that way. So if you're this particular kind of person for, you know, since you were 14 years old and here you are 34 and you're like, oh my God, I've been doing this and I do want to be different. It takes like almost 20 years to make that natural. Like it has to be an active thing to break a habit. You have to consciously think about it, but it takes a while for it to become an unconscious thing to like truly inhabit it. So it's, you know.
Yeah, I mean, both the men that I mentioned, they passed away now, and their families tell us, you know, told me that they were working on it right up until they died. There was no let up because the programming is so strong. So, you know, apart from Chuck, who has tackled this sort of self-awareness, you know, do any of you know any other books that have this sort of father figure, or is this something that you think that horror authors might, maybe one of you might want to take on the challenge of writing this type of figure?
Yes. Any particular books? I think Bracken McLeod has done this a few times. I'm trying to remember the particular ones. Come to Dust might be one. That's more of a Not that's someone becoming a father figure, like realizing what that might be and changing their life for this other person. Trying to think of other books there might be. He's just one of the writers that I find to be sort of very acutely aware of the human condition. He calls it secular horror, where it doesn't involve the supernatural or anything like that. And who else? John, right there. He wades into the human condition pretty deeply. John McElveen, he does as well, and I think it's because at some point they were all students of King, who wastes a lot of time on character development, and really explores what's making someone tick.
Yeah. Angela and John, do you have any recommendations of that sort of books with that sort of character in it, or is it just Chuck's?
Well, I know that John's going to have like a million of them. So I'm going to just throw Victor Laval with the Changeling. That one I think really kind of explores fatherhood, masculinity, race, myths. I mean, a lot of what we're talking about, I feel like, and I'm going to mention a game as well and he's not quite the father. He adopts the girl, but The Last of Us. I don't know. I didn't really play it a lot, but The Last of Us, Joel adopts Ellie, and he's not her father, but he is her father figure. And so those are going to be my two picks. Those are on my list.
Yeah. John?
The Changeling's a wonderful recommendation. That's and Bracken stuff too. It's true that Bracken is so insightful and incisive when it comes to what I want to call human nature. I actually think King's later novel Dr. Sleep, which deals with the son Danny Torrance from The Shining as an adult who has fallen into a lot of his father's behaviors, who's become an alcoholic and who becomes a kind of de facto father figure over the course of the novel. I wouldn't push that comparison too far, but and also it's funny. I must have King on the brain. King wrote a novel called Fairy Tale a few years ago, and the protagonist of that has a father who his wife died, the boy's mother died, and the father just cratered. He just became an alcoholic. I wouldn't exactly say physically abusive, but certainly was on a downward trajectory, and he pulled it together. Not quite at the last minute, but kind of close. But the son is constantly on high alert. Every time his dad is out for too long, he thinks to himself, is he at the bar? And I think that plays an interesting role in that novel.
Okay, so we have a question from the audience. Let me put this on screen. Okay, so Manusha Kandasivam, do horror narratives often punish or redeem fathers differently than mothers? What does that say about cultural tropes or anxieties? Let's start with Angela.
I'm going to say yes, but it's interesting how our different genres have that, because like something that I think of a lot is stepmothers in fairy tales. It's always the stepmothers, the evil one, and then in horror, a lot of times it's the father figure. So, and they do get punished. I guess I'm going to say karmically, even like, did Jack get punished? Yeah, like everybody kind of got punished though. So I think that's more of the horror thing is, yeah, they can get punished, but everybody is punished. Like, no, we're not singling dads out. We punish everybody. So,
yeah, Errick.
Man, yes, I do think it is different. And I do think it's you could probably see a generational shift in that. I think Gen X and older, I think the fathers are punished more through their own behavior or in their own psyche, sort of self-flagellation, but women, they get it bad. It's always, almost always something really, really awful, portrayed with a certain amount of helplessness, guilelessness, what am I saying? With no guile. Yeah, and then that sort of starts to change as we move further into the 21st century, and millennials and Gen Y and stuff are starting to write things that it's different. Yeah, it was different. Maybe less so now.
How about you, John?
I kind of feel that in a lot of older horror, as it were, horror written by Gen X and above, that there is redemption available to bad fathers, but quite often that redemption involves they sacrifice their lives. And so it's as if, their sins have been so terrible that the only way they can atone for it is to hold off the monster or the zombie horde or whatever it is, right? Mothers in those novels, I think, can also achieve a certain kind of redemption, but that's often just by being a mom or being a good mom or something like that. It is interesting, given one of the underlying concerns of our conversation has been the relationship between fatherhood and violence, especially as it's portrayed in the media, bad fathers, right? That so often the redemption of fathers comes violently. It's as if they have to blow themselves up. They have to do something, and that's how they atone. They don't have to live with whatever it is they've done and try to go on for the rest of their lives with that burden.
Oh, you know what just struck
don't
me?
usually live.
Yeah. You know what just struck me about having positive dads in horror? Poltergeist, the original Poltergeist. That dad, he is pretty good. He defended his family. He believed everything that was happening, and he got them out of there.
Even in the sequel, I think he's also he emerges as even more sort of a heroic figure, doesn't he?
Not when he was drinking that tequila.
Oh,
he swallows the worm and becomes possessed.
I do remember that.
Oh, all right. I don't remember that.
Wow. Responsibility, yeah.
But that's a metaphor all in its own.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just thought of that dad because I just read, hey, wait a minute. That was what made in the 1980s? Is it the 1980s?
Early 80s.
And The Shining came out in 1980? Is it 19?
Yeah, 80s? No, it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it bad that I keep wanting to go, oh no, that's when I was a kid. And then I'm like, oh yeah, that was the 1980s.
Yeah. It's just like two radically different fathers in the horror genre in the movies, right in the 80s. And maybe, do you think that's the time when things started to transition? Because we were talking before this session on air, we were talking about how in the last, 40, 50 years, the way fathers are portrayed in horror, just there's this development arc that went from that to that. And then I realized, wait a minute, they had both in the 80s. Did you think the 80s is a turning point there?
Maybe. I think there's always those extreme examples, but like I was reminded watching Stranger Things.
Oh yes,
first season.
Yeah.
That I remember a lot of folks were having a conversation and they were complaining about how it was like watching something from the 80s and that it was, it had these shortcomings and that bothered me. And I said, maybe they wrote it that way intentionally as a reflection of, an 80s type story, because all the fathers in that were present, but absent.
Yeah.
They would be reading the paper or eating something. And they're like, yeah, and then suddenly try to assert their authority. But the mothers were already so deep into it that, they became kind of pointless. And I feel like that's the father that was sort of the primary cliche in the 80s, just kind of present, but not quite there, providing any value.
Yeah. What's interesting is people think, Steve, he had a character arc and then it got to a point where he was more of a dad to the rest of the kids.
Right.
Than any of the other dads.
Yes. He had to step up.
He stepped up, and I thought that was interesting because at the start of the series, he was the typical, the typical popular boy at school, and he had he had sexism and all that, and then as the series went on, you can see how it all developed, and he became the de facto father figure for the entire group.
Yeah,
and
he actually matured.
He actually did what the dad should do. There were like lots of horrible dads in Stranger Things, but Steve is not one of them. And I thought that was interesting because he was supposed to be one of the kids, right? He was supposed to be one of the teens, but he stepped up.
Yeah.
And he did what was needed to be done. So now we come to the last question of the day. Do you have any, we're going back from fiction to real life now. So all of you are parents, and do you have any particular tips and suggestions for dads and dads-to-be who want to raise feminist sons and men who become excellent male role models for the boys and the young men in their lives? So we'll start with Angela.
I'm so glad I'm starting because this is like kind of a really obvious one to me. So you guys have to think of something more creative. But I'm going to say model it. Just be that person that, which kind of comes to fiction. Like when you talk about Poltergeist, I was sitting here thinking how they are saved because he listens to his family and he is involved with his family. And so that message is what I say we, but I'm obviously not going to be a dad anytime soon. I'm 57. I'm not going to be any parent pretty soon, hopefully. But like we doing that, we modeling what we want to see. If what is that saying? Become the change that you hope to see in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember who said that, but that's what I would say. Just physically, we model that. Instead of telling people what they should do, become what we should be. And that goes along for women as well. Us accepting, I was in an abusive relationship. I'm not giving him any kind of grace. You know what I mean? Like it was wrong. But I was also not standing up for myself. I wasn't taking charge of my boundaries. And so I'm not saying that made it appropriate, but we as women can also model the kind of behavior, how we want to be treated as well. So that's what I'm going to say.
Errick?
I think I was in my late 20s, maybe early 30s, and it just stuck in my head after a couple of other things. And I forget who said it, but it was their definition of feminism was the radical notion that women are people. And shortly after that, I met my wife. And when we had kids, and I have two daughters, we both treated them like people, like not, something other than, like their role wasn't this weird, they're just small, inexperienced people. So we always spoke with them like they were people. And it's like, if you treat your kids, like they're people, they're probably going to grow up to be pretty good people, which ours did. And we talk and we can talk with each other, and that seems to have worked. So that means being loyal, respectful, truthful, and modeling behavior, like Angela said. That's, this is the way our relationship can be both successful and beneficial for both of us. So yeah, treat them like people, not like pet things. Ugh.
Yeah, that's interesting because in many cultures, daughters are not treated like people. And in many cultures, children are not treated like people. Children of whatever gender, they're treated like property. You do as you're told. You see, not heard. And then you wonder why you grow up, the kids grow up, and, especially in the last maybe 20, 30 years, they start thinking, no, I'm not and there are consequences to that in the family dynamic.
Yeah.
So anyway, John, what do you think? You have two boys, I think, two sons.
I have two sons and a daughter, and when my wife and I when she was pregnant with our son, my youngest son, we have a dear friend of hers who has these two amazing boys. They're probably in their late 20s or early 30s now. And my wife said to her, "How did you do it?" Like, we were really looking for, because even at that point they were probably teenagers. They're just the most wonderful boys. And she said, I never stopped talking to them. I never stopped that. And if you've ever, which sounds really obvious until you have teenagers and you realize like how tricky that can be. And but I thought I'm going to follow that advice. And in my case, I was fortunate in that where we live, I have to drive my son, or had to drive my son any place he wanted to go to fish in particular. And what that meant was I would just talk to him, and it was great because we were in the car, so we didn't have to look at each other. We were both just looking straight ahead, but it allowed us there wasn't any of that body language or whatever that I think gets in the way sometimes. And I think it's absolutely true, right? That your kids being people does not take away from you. Like, allowing them to be people does not it doesn't threaten you. It doesn't, it's in a way, it's not about you. And I think that is very, very hard. I'm not saying it's easy to learn, but I think that kind of constant communication, a constant willingness to talk to them, and then to hear what they have to say. That's the flip side, right? Because what they say may not always be pleasant. It may not be what you want to hear, but being willing to listen to that and not freak out. I think that's a good beginning anyway.
Yeah, because what we've noticed is when in many cultures is they don't talk to their sons when their sons are growing up. They just let them do whatever they want, and we'll back you up however you behave. And then with daughters say stuff, and parents just don't listen. It just bounces off them. Oh yeah, daughter's saying stuff, whatever, and then that perpetuates all the gender stereotypes and things like that, and gender roles, and it's not very healthy. And then people wonder why we have dysfunctional family relationships, and why did my son behave so violently, why did my daughter, and so it's a really good thing about treating your kids like children, not children, treating your kids like people even when they are children, and talking to them as they grow up. And outside of running the Pixel Project, I am a teacher, and I teach teenagers, middle schoolers and teenagers.
Oh my God.
Condolences. Yeah.
What I found is if the kids are not talking to their parents, they will talk to their teacher. Mm. If their teacher absolutely makes sure that the class is a safe space, that you can talk to your teacher, you can talk to your tutor, you can talk to your coach. So talking to the kids, so important. Treating them like people, so important. And they won't be violent or sexist or misogynist if you take the time to do that, and they'll be able to have the critical thinking skills when they consume pop culture, media, anything now in this age where they're on TikTok and anything else that comes up that takes their fancy. So talking is so important. Anyway, so we've come to the end of the discussion for today. And I just would like to remind everybody that aside from joining today's panel, Angela, Errick, and John have donated some really awesome goodies to the stash of author sheets we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels Fall 2025 Rally Up fundraising page. So I'm going to put something on screen to show everybody where to go. Okay. So you can donate for goodies by Rally Up. You can go to tinyurl.com/R4P Rally Up 2025. And Juliana, who is in today's chat box moderator, will put the link up as well. And you can find out more about Read for Pixels from bit.ly at bit.ly/Read for Pixels. And Angela donated 3 types of goodies. So you have the Authortunities newsletter subscription for authors, where you'll get a weekly email rounding up the best opportunities for authors for submissions and everything else. And then there's the second goodie, which is the Authortunities Hub subscription for authors. So that you can get help with learning about. You can get access to tools and training to prepare your book for print. You're eligible to be published under the Authortunities Press, which is a collaborative imprint. 100% of royalties and rights are retained, and you get promotion by the author, and you get promotional support, including YouTube features and social media spotlights, reaching over 25,500 readers, writers, and creatives. And also, Angela has very kindly offered that's the third goodie. Angela is kindly offering to read 10 pages of a donor's work in progress, followed by a 60-minute consultation session, during which she'll provide feedback and advice about writing and publishing. And she'll record that session, and you'll get to keep it. And Errick will be giving away 3 goodies from his personal library of great reads. This is the perfect treat for comics and graphic novel fans in the US. And it's Heart Transplant by Andrew Wilkes and Frank Caruso. This is about bullying. So if you need something to talk about, to use as a prop to talk about with your kids, this would be a really good idea for you to donate to get it. And Errick will send it to you because it tackles the issue of bullying, which is rampant in quite a few schools across the world. And there's Barnstormers by Scott Snyder and Tula Lotay. And there's The Last Broadcast by Andres D'Angelo and Gabriel Lumazark. All of these are first editions. And Errick will write a personal letter and to share why he recommends reading these graphic novels, and he will sign them. And finally, John is offering a 60-minute Zoom call for writers looking for expert guidance. The donor has a choice of making the Zoom session a consultation on a piece of fiction of up to 10 pages long. This is available to single authors or writing duos. And option 2 is having a general conversation about writing and publishing. This is available for individuals and groups. And there are also plenty more author goodies available from authors such as Chitra Banerjee Dibakaruni, Premi Muhammad, Zank Books, and more. And new goodies will be released every week throughout September. And we've raised $1,150 towards our $5,000 goal so far. So please give generously before the fundraiser ends in October 2025. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. And if you are watching this and you're also interested in feminist and horror poetry, you might want to get your hands on a copy of our award-winning Under Her Eye poetry collection that is published in partnership with Black Spot Books. You can get it in paperback or ebook edition from all major booksellers worldwide. This collection includes poems by 112 acclaimed female and non-binary poets, and includes poems by Bram Stoker Awards winner Stephanie M. Vitovich and Marsh Simon. And it closes on a powerful note with a map of the backyard by Bram Stoker Awards nominee Jessica McHughes, and all net proceeds from Under Her Eye go towards keeping the Pixel Project's anti-violence against women work alive and kicking. And finally, to find out more about violence against women and to help victims worldwide, please visit our website at www.thepixelproject.net. And if you need help for domestic violence and sexual assault helplines and resources in every UN-recognized country and territory in the world, please visit the nomoredirectory.org. So now, Errick, Angela, and John, do any of you have any announcements? Do you have any books coming up that you might want to let people know about?
I would just point out that my latest, The Queen of Saturn and the Prince in Exile, is currently available. It's a fairly short novel, and it's a Black nerd coming-of-age story that takes place in 1970s Boston in the aftermath of civil rights. And it's about a boy whose mother insists that she's from Saturn his entire life, and he's trying to find out the truth.
Angela, do you have anything coming up?
Yes. Yeah, I actually, through the power of indie micropresses, last week I had a publisher ask me if I had a romance lying around, and I was like, oh, I do, a paranormal romance. It's got demons in it, so don't kick me out of the horror club yet. But so that just got published this week, and I'm so excited because it's just a goofy, fun, and I need goofy fun right now. So it was really nice to see that. That's Soft Deadline, about an incubus who gets conjured by a witch who's kind of like nothing is really turning out for her. You know, she's having that moment of self-doubt, and he's tired, and he really doesn't want to perform as an incubus. So that's a fun story that I've loved so much writing, and so I'm happy to see that out. And on a more, a better note, The Coven of the East is coming out. I've been editing that with Colleen Chow, and that is stories, it's reimagining Asian women's magical histories. So we've got some Asian witchcraft in there, some Asian witches that are practicing today, because we wanted to show, we see a lot of witches, but where are the Asian witches? And so that's what that's about. And then my final announcement would be, you really need to get over there to get these treats, these goodies that everybody has up, because I've opened that page and I'm going to clean it out. So if you want anything, go get the auction right now.
And I nearly forgot to say that Angela has said we have normally the Author Trinity's goodies have a bit of a higher price, but Angela is lowering it so that if you make a donation, the donation that we ask to us, that we have attached to those goodies, if you make the donation to us, you can get a year's subscription for less. And that subscription will start on the 1st of October, just in time to kick off Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So if you're re-upping your subscription or you're curious about it, donate to us, and Angela will get you on the list for either opportunity. Okay, so John, anything coming up from you?
Yeah, I have a relatively new collection of stories out, which is called Lost in the Dark and Other Excursions. That's out from Word Horde Press, and you can buy it directly from Word Horde. You can also get it from the Evil Empire, or you can order it through your local bookstore, your local independent bookstore, which would be a nice thing to do.
The Evil Empire.
I think we all know what he's talking about.
Yeah. It's become so everyone knows now. We know what the Evil Empire is. And with that, thank you all for joining us today, everyone. And if you are not on Eastern Standard Time, if you're watching this and not on Eastern Standard Time, you might want to stay on till 7:45 p.m. Pacific Time tonight, where we'll be talking to award-winning fantasy author Premi Muhammad, and that's coming up in about an hour's time. Thank you all so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you guys.